morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be attending the Euro Area Summit today. Myself and the President of the ECB will be briefing the heads of government on recent economic developments. The three messages that I will be giving are firstly, that despite the huge challenges that we have faced in 2022, the euro area in the face of those challenges showed its resilience. It grew by over 3%, and while we expect a lower rate of economic growth for this year, we still expect the euro area to grow. All that being said, recent developments that have taken place in financial markets and in banks across the world remind us of the need to be ever vigilant and to continue to monitor risks as they develop. Which will lead on to my second message, which is that in the face of these changes, budgetary policy within the euro area has to remain coordinated, but it also has to change. The Eurogroup has now, on two occasions in recent months, acknowledged that as we are now in an atmosphere of inflation remaining high and the cost of borrowing going up, that our budgetary policies for this year and next year do need to slowly change. We do need to maintain support for our societies, particularly for the most vulnerable, but we strongly acknowledge that measures that increase demand within our economies and permanently increase borrowing will no longer be warranted in the face of change that is taking place. And then finally, I'll be emphasising again the need for steady progress with regard to banking union. Last summer, the Eurogroup reached agreement on further steps forward on banking union. Now is the time to implement those agreements. I expect and look forward to the Commission bringing forward proposals soon that will look to implement the agreements that we made regarding how we can strengthen deposit guarantee schemes in the face of any change that could happen. And we must, when those Commission proposals are brought forward, act upon them and bring them to final agreement in the time ahead. But it's also equally important that we continue to implement agreements that have been in place for some time. And it is why it is so important that we go ahead with the full ratification of the reform of the European Stability Mechanism to ensure that the Single Resolution Fund has the kind of support that the European Union has already agreed it should have. So a lot of change taking place at the moment, but in the face of all of that change, I do believe we can make the case that the euro and the euro area is showing its resilience. And while the year ahead, of course, will be a year with many challenges within it, all of our forecasts at the moment continue to point to record levels of employment and also point to growth. Acknowledging the growth is low, but growth in the world that we're in at the moment is important and will make a difference.
Should the ministers treat this subject with utmost emergency?
Pardon me?
Should the ministers treat the issue of finishing the banking union with their utmost urgency?
What we should do is we should implement what we have agreed to do. So the measures that were agreed to develop banking union were agreed last summer, and I do believe they can make a difference to how we can continue to strengthen banking union within the euro area. If you look at where our banking system stands at the moment, I do believe that the measures that we have taken in recent years have clearly strengthened the resilience of our banks, and they are the result of clear and gradual and significant change, and we need to continue with that approach. And I am confident that if we are successful in implementing the proposals that are being brought forward to the Commission, that they will help. But it is about implementing what we have already agreed to do, because what we have done in the past, we can see the value of it now, and we need to continue with a steady approach and implement agreements that have already been made.
How big is the risk for a new
I'll go for you, and then I'll go for you, yeah?
How big is the risk for a new banking crisis?
So I am very confident in the amount of liquidity, the amount of resilience that our banking system has built up. And I equally believe that our regulators, our institutions at national and European level have played a very, very important role in strengthening the resilience of our banking system. So I believe we have the reserves and the resilience to ensure the stability of our banking system at the moment, and that is due to policy decisions that have been made and have worked. But we can never be complacent, and it is why our regulators continue to monitor developments within our banking system. They briefed the Eurogroup in our meeting there last week, and we will continue to receive regular briefings from them. So I'm confident that the changes that we have made are working. I'm confident that due to the amount of liquidity our banking system now has in Europe, it has built up the resilience that we need. But we all know that it's vital that we have to continue to monitor developments and then, as I said, implement the agreements that we have agreed to do. Yeah.
Do you think that the decisions taken by the Swiss regulators in the context of Credit Suisse
Just pardon me, I didn't catch the end of your question. So I think the actions that have been taken by central banks all over the world have actually played an important role in stabilising the difficulties that we're clearly building, and the interventions that have been made by all of the central banks that have been involved in responding back to banking developments have been appropriate and have been effective. But what we need to do here now within the European Union is maintain our steady progress in building banking union. The agreements that we have, the work that we are doing is not the importance of it is emphasised to me by recent developments, but the work that we are doing we'd already agreed to do, and we should implement and make progress on agreements that were already in place, and I'm confident we'll be able to do that. I'll just take two more.
If the Ukrainian war continues, do you think that there may be some European bank will be collapsed?
I'm confident in the resilience of our banking system at the moment. I think last year was a very good example of that. Despite the outbreak of this terrible war on the people of Ukraine, the euro area actually grew, despite the expectations and forecasts of so many. And our financial system has shown that it has the ability to weather the challenges of both the pandemic and the early economic consequences of the war. And I'm confident that will continue to be the case, but we can never be complacent either, which is why the work of our regulators and future policy change is so important. And I'll just take a final one from you, otherwise I'll be late for the summit.
There's this promise that banks will not be saved anymore with taxpayers' money, but in Switzerland this doesn't happen. Can you keep the promise for Europe?
So this is why we need to ensure that the Single Resolution Fund has the support that it will need in the future, particularly from 2024 onwards, to ensure that if there are future banking difficulties, that we are not asking the national taxpayer to pay for it. We have a strong resolution and regulatory framework built up within the European Union, which is all about dealing with difficulties if they emerge effectively and doing everything possible to protect national taxpayers. And it's why one of the next steps we need to take is ensure that the link between the European Stability Mechanism and the Single Resolution Fund is in place from the 1st of January 2024 onwards. Okay, thank you all very much. Thanks now. Over to you.
Can we just ask you what the expectations are from the meeting today? Might we hear anything about inflation, about interest rates? What do you expect?
So it's this Euro area summit is taking place at a really important point in the economic developments of Europe and indeed Ireland. And myself and President Lagarde will be briefing the heads of government on the economic developments of recent months and what our response back to it should be. So inflation will form part of the briefing that we will be offering, and we will be making the point that even though inflation has come down in the euro area and in some economies, it is still high, and there are signs that the nature of that inflation is changing, that it is now moving beyond where we are just with the energy sector, but influencing other parts of our economy as well. So part of how we will need to respond back to that is we will need to see over time a change in budgetary policy. The Eurogroup on 2 occasions in the last number of months has acknowledged that at a time in which inflation is still high and the cost of borrowing is going up, that the decisions that finance ministers will have to take this year and next year will need to gradually change. And it is why it was so important in Ireland that as we moved into the summer, we moved away from the broad-based energy support measures that we had in place at the end of last year, because we are in a difficult moment. The consequences of the war and inflation could be with us for some time, and we need to ensure that measures that we have in place are affordable but also sustainable. And that's one of the messages we'll be emphasising today.
Does that mean...
Sorry, can you explain what you mean by inflation changing, like in real terms? What does that mean for...
We are seeing some signs at the moment that the kind of composition of inflation is beginning to change. We're seeing some indications that the price of food, the price of services are also beginning to change. And even though inflation is going down a bit, and it's mainly going down because the price of energy is showing signs of beginning to decrease, we're also seeing other goods that are part of how we measure inflation either not go down with the speed we would want or beginning to show some signs of increasing.
Does that mean that there will be less scope for cost of living supports?
So there will be scope for cost of living supports. The exact scale of them as part of our budget next year and budgets to come will have to be defined when we get to the winter. But what it does mean is if we're in an environment in which the cost of energy has come down, and we think it has come down between now and the approaching winter, that the level of energy support has to change too. And it's why it was so important that in the recent decisions the government made, we agreed on an exit path out of the significant excise reductions of last year. And we said once we've implemented the current energy credit, we won't make a decision on another one until the budget. So it is about what is happening now between now and the winter, changing those measures that were in place last winter so they're not running throughout the year. And as we approach our budget planning for next year, we'll all have to make a decision on what is the right level of support for our economies.
In that context, how do you feel about ECB rate rises? Are you going to see that consistently?
So that's very much a matter for the European Central Bank. I respect their independence and their autonomy fully. But the challenge that we have is one that has to be shared between budgetary policy and the decisions that are made with regard to interest rates and the supply of money. And the Eurogroup on 2 occasions now has explicitly recognised that decisions that we make at budget level shouldn't make the job of getting inflation down harder. And it's why we have recommitted to saying that very broad measures that boost demand within economies were appropriate last year, were certainly appropriate 2 years before it, but are no longer appropriate now.
Can I ask just on the domestic issue of evictions? Obviously the government facing a number of votes next week. Do you and other ministers have a handle on the level of evictions that you're expecting over the coming months? Ministers have said they expect it to increase, that's inevitable. But what sort of level of evictions are you expecting?
So I don't have a briefing on the eviction risk that could develop in the months ahead beyond that which the Minister for Housing has already shared. So I know as we approach the aftermath of the moratorium ending, there is a heightened risk of tenancies no longer being maintained, but I don't have any new figures with regard to it.
Do we have any sense of the sort of level at all?
I can't give an indication of that beyond what the Minister for Housing has already said. I don't have any new information on it. Okay? Okay, see you later on.
Great.
See you now. Thanks, Ned.
How's it going, everyone? Good morning, and I'm glad to be here today for the Euro Summit. Today we'll get presentations from the President of the ECB, Christine Lagarde, and also the President of the Eurogroup, Pascal Donoghue. There'll be a big focus on inflation and the efforts being made to bring inflation down and to secure price stability again. And of course that's linked to interest rate policy, and I'll be keen to get a view, if I can, from Christine Lagarde as to when she thinks inflation will start falling significantly, and therefore when we can say to people that we're at the top of the interest rate cycle, and we'll be interested to get her thoughts on that. Also, there'll be discussion on the banking situation. People will be familiar with some bank failures in Switzerland and the US, so there'll be a discussion on that as well.
Taoiseach, can you just give an outline of your intervention last night on the competitiveness issue and the concerns Ireland has about a European sovereign fund and big spending in the green tech sector?
Yes, so our view, and I expressed this very strongly last night, is that there must be more to competitiveness than subsidies and state aid. Because ultimately what happens when it comes to subsidies and state aid, which I'm not against if they're used appropriately, but if you go too far on subsidies and state aid, what you end up is using loads of taxpayers' money to give it to companies, and countries just end up cancelling each other out at the expense of their taxpayers. And that can be particularly difficult for smaller countries because we just wouldn't have the financial firepower and that could leave our companies at a disadvantage. And that's why the single market is all about a level playing field and having state aid rules. So the point I've made very strongly is that we should try to cooperate with the US on climate action rather than ending up in a subsidy race, which would be just taxpayers' money for companies. And also that there has to be more to competitiveness than state aid. We need to focus on innovation, on training, on research, on education, on realising the potential of a banking union, of a capital markets union, a single market in digital and services. And, I kind of pointed out last night that I started attending these meetings 6 years ago, and I haven't seen a huge amount of progress on things like the Capital Markets Union or the Banking Union, quite frankly, and that is disappointing. President von der Leyen, I suppose, accepted that what has been put forward so far are just communications, and said that we would see more concrete proposals coming in the next few weeks or months.
Are you concerned that the recent Inflation Reduction Act that was introduced in the United States could lure some businesses over to America and hit investment in Ireland? We've already seen companies like Volkswagen and other parts of Europe saying they're putting investment on pause because of what they're being offered in the US.
I think that is a risk. We don't have a large industry when it comes to batteries and cars. We do have an industry, but not like other European countries do, so I don't think it's an enormous risk for Ireland, but it is a risk for Ireland and a risk for Europe that you could see companies moving investment from European countries like Ireland to the US. So what then tends to happen is we then respond by matching the subsidies to prevent that happening. And what happens then is you just see a subsidies race where the US and Europe keep increasing our subsidies and keep using more and more taxpayers' money, and we actually just cancel each other out at the expense of our taxpayers, and companies end up getting a whole lot of money. And perhaps there are better ways to incentivise the green revolution than a subsidies race, and that's why I think we should try to cooperate with the US on that. Said that here, said that in the White House and in Congress last week, and I think there are some moves in that direction actually.
Can I ask about the level of evictions that are expected in coming months? Do you ministers have a clear idea of what sort of numbers are likely to be involved, and what happens if those numbers? First of all, what are those numbers? And second of all, what happens if those numbers are exceeded?
Well, I don't think it's possible to have a clear or accurate number for a lot of reasons. First of all, evictions in Ireland can only be ordered by the courts. I think people often mix up notices of termination with evictions. Eviction orders can only be issued by the courts, and I would expect those numbers to continue to be very small. And I can guarantee you that judges are very reluctant to evict people into homelessness. So we do need to start, I think, using words a bit more accurately, and evictions are ordered by court. It's not the same as a notice of quit or a notice of termination. And then when it comes, for example, to the number of homeless people in emergency accommodation, there's sadly nearly 12,000 people in emergency accommodation. The reasons for that are manifold. And it's not simply people who've had a notice to quit served on them. If you look at the last couple of months, when the number of people in emergency accommodation has increased every month, there was an eviction ban in place. What were the reasons? It was family breakdown. It was all sorts of different other issues as to why people look for emergency accommodation, increasing numbers of families and people from overseas as well seeking emergency accommodation. So this kind of idea that I think the opposition put across, that notice of termination turns to eviction, turns to person in homeless accommodation, that's not how it works.
But the implication then is that many people will overhold beyond their notice to quit.
I don't know. I think some people will overhold, and I think in those scenarios the vast majority of property owners and landlords are very reasonable. They will understand that sometimes people will need more time to find an alternative place to go, and provide they're paying the rent. A lot of property owners and landlords will be reasonable at that. There will be other cases that end up in the courts, where courts will adjudicate on the matter and decide whether or not an eviction order is appropriate. And from my experience dealing with difficult cases and constituency cases, courts are very reluctant to evict people into homelessness for humanitarian reasons. But often these cases can be very complicated. I hear cases all the time being brought up by opposition members in the Dáil that on the face of it sound like really hard cases. And when you actually dig into the details, it can be a lot more complicated. Sometimes the person facing a notice of termination has a share in a property, for example. Just to give you one example, so I think we need to be careful with that too. That often cases that are put across that are genuine hardship cases on the face of it may still be hardship cases, but actually can be very complicated. Another one brought up in the Dáil recently. When I looked into it, turned out that the landlord who was being demonised for evicting this person was actually dead, and it was an executor sale. So we need to be mindful that every case is different and every case is individual, but certainly from my experience, actual eviction orders can only be issued by a court, and it's very, very rare that a judge would evict an individual or family into homelessness. They would always try to provide time for a solution to be found.
Taoiseach, very dramatic news last night in Kerry in relation to Kerry Davies case, reopening a very painful chapter. Do you have any thoughts on that development?
I heard the news, and this is a case that has never been closed. And I understand the Gardaí have made some arrests now. It is a live investigation, so probably best for me not to say too much about it, but a really tragic case that I think everyone in the country is familiar with, and the Gardaí have continued to investigate it, and this I understand is a significant development.
Taoiseach, can I ask you about yesterday's discussion around application? Is Ireland becoming increasingly isolated in EU circles with its neutral stance, bearing in mind the shift?
No, I don't believe so. There are 4 countries in the European Union that are not members of NATO and don't intend to join NATO, and there's a very good and fair understanding of our position and our particular sensitivities and culture and politics around that. I've never for a second felt under any pressure from other Prime Ministers or Presidents to change our position on it. But I do need to be very clear. Ireland is militarily neutral, which means that we're not members of NATO. We're not members of any military alliance. But we're not politically neutral. We've always been on the side of the West, and on the side of democracy, and on the side of freedom. And that's particularly the case now that we're facing this war in Ukraine. And we participate in PESCO, which is European security and defence. We participate in the European Defence Agency. We're a member of EU battle groups. So, our neutrality needs to be seen for what it is in that sense.
Your predecessor said this time last year when the war started that there had to be a discussion about neutrality. I mean, a year down the line, we seem to be no closer to that. When do you think might be an appropriate time for that?
Yeah, so actually Taoiseach is developing proposals on that, and at the right time, at a time of his choosing, I think he'll tell you more about it, but he has developed some proposals as to how we could consult with stakeholders and the public in a meaningful way on how our defence and security policy should evolve.
Citizens' Assembly, one of the
wouldn't be fair for me to kind of half-announce a proposal that he's developing at the moment, so I'll leave it to the Taoiseach, the Minister of Defence, to do that in his own time.
Okay.
Sorry, there's still a lot of banks working. Sorry, there's still banks working, European banks working in Russia. For example, in Austria, the Raiffeisenbank International. Will this be a topic today, and do you think these banks should be sanctioned and there should be more pressure on them to stop working?
Sorry, can you give me that again?
It's called Raiffeisenbank International. It's an Austrian bank, and should there be more pressure on these kind of banks that are still working in Russia?
Yeah, I don't know enough about that particular issue, so I probably shouldn't comment on it. Sorry.
All right.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
se nám stále víc daří dostávat jádro a jadernou energetiku do těch jednotlivých materiálů a rozhodnutí. Vítám to, že
Tänään jatkamme eurohuippukokouksen merkeissä. Meillä on paikalla Euroopan keskuspankin Llegada kertomassa tilanteesta. Tietenkin yleinen taloudellinen tilanne tulee keskusteluttamaan ja sen lisäksi tietenkin pankkiunionin tilanne on se, mistä me tulemme puhumaan.
Mitä mieltä Suomi on oppaisesta talletussuojasta?
No, nämä kysymykset ovat tänään yleisellä tasolla esillä. Päätelmät luonnoksessa ei ole mitään kovin yksityiskohtaista. Suomi on peräänkuuluttanut pitkään sitä, että pankkiunionia pitää pystyä vahvistamaan. Ja on hyvä, että näitä toimia on aikaisemmin tehty. Me myös tiedämme, että näihin kysymyksiin liittyy myös näkemyseroja jäsenmaiden välillä.
Myös talouden ohjauskehyksestä käytäneen keskustelua.
Varmasti yleisestä koordinaatiosta tulemme käymään keskustelua. Varmasti kuulemme myös keskuspankin suunnitelmista koskien korkopolitiikkaa. Me olemme nähneet, että keskuspankki on hyvin aktiivisesti korkoja nostanut torjuakseen inflaatiota ja varmasti kiinnostaa kuulla nämä tulevaisuuden näkymät. En tiedä, kuinka yksityiskohtaisia vastauksia tähän saamme, mutta ehkäpä suuntaa kuitenkin.
Minkälaisia ohjauksia tässä ohjauskehyksestä löydetään maakunnasta
No, me olemme avoimia tähän tarkasteluun. Tämä keskustelu on vielä edessä. Me emme tänään mene kovin yksityiskohtaiselle tasolle näissä asioissa.
Miten näette keskuspankin roolia?
Keskuspankin tehtävä on ennen muuta tietenkin torjua inflaatiota korkopolitiikan avulla. Se keskustelu, mitä me olemme aikaisemmin käyneet, jota edelleenkin on syytä käydä, on se, minkälainen koordinaatio valtioiden harjoittaman talouspolitiikan, keskuspankin politiikan välillä on, että välttäisimme tilanteita, jossa nämä ovat ristiriidassa keskenänsä. Varmasti kaikilla on intressi sekä saada inflaatiota alas kuin ylläpitää taloudellista vakautta.
Mikä arvionne on, että vetääkö talouspolitiikkaa edes nolla
No, tämä on se riski, joka on ollut jo pidempään. Eli meillä on hyvin erijalkaista päätöksentekoa keskuspankkien ja valtioiden välillä. Käytämme resursseja ei järkevästi ja tämä voi aiheuttaa osaltansa ongelmia. Sen vuoksi tätä koordinaatiota, sen keskustelun peräänkuuluttamista on jo pidempään tehty.
Komission puheenjohtaja Ursula von der Leyen eilen kokousta, jossa käsiteltäisiin Venäjälle kaupan työmarkkinoilla vastaan Mitäs tästä asiasta?
Mielestäni tämä on erittäin tärkeä aihe ja tämä oli myös yksi keskusteluaihe eilen. Ja näiden lasten tilanne, tämä räikeä sotarikos, joka on tapahtunut ja valitettavasti käynnissä koko ajan. Ukrainalaisten lasten tilanne huolestuttaa ja kyllä ilman muuta tämä asia pitää hyvin huolellisesti perata, selvittää, kaikki asianosaisten tahojen pitää joutua vastuuseen. Suomi auttaa tietenkin kaikki niiden keinojen kautta, mitä meillä on käytettävissä. Uskoisin, että meillä on tämäkin asian osalta paljon osaamista, mutta tässäkin, kuten muissakin kysymyksissä, tarvitaan yhteistä ponnistusta, yhteistä yhteistyötä.
Suomi lähetti 14 apupakettia. Onko Suomi auttanut?
Suomi on todella myöntänyt 14 aseapupakettia Ukrainalle. Nämä ovat olleet mittavia, mutta tämä apu ei ole riittävää. Enemmän tarvitaan niin Suomelta kuin kaikilta muiltakin. Sen vuoksi me olemme jo aiemmin sanoneet, että me tulemme tarjoamaan apua niin kauan kuin on tarpeen. Me tulemme valmistelemaan myös jatkossa näitä aseapupaketteja.
Can you confirm whether yesterday there has been a discussion on China during the leaders' summit? And can you confirm reports that several leaders have warned against the risk of isolating China?
We haven't had a broad discussion of China in this meeting.
And there are more than 10,000 people living in Finland. They may be paid for the Finland right now. You try to be member of the NATO. Do you think they will not pay for the Kurdish?
I don't understand the question.
There are more than 10,000 Kurdish living in Finland. You are trying to be a member of the NATO. Maybe Turkey they are going to ask you for the torture, sanitation, deportation. So do you think they will not pay anything for Kurdish? They are all safe in Finland?
We are in the middle of the NATO process. Turkey has noted that they will ratify our application before the election. Also, Hungary has said the same. I think their date is next Monday, and there hasn't been any discussion about these matters on the ratification process.
And how about the competition? Do you think they will be
Hyvä, kiitoksia.
not dobry. Szanowni Państwo, dzisiaj będziemy koncentrować się na stabilności rynku finansowego, która to stabilność jest potrzebna, aby rynek wewnętrzny działał bez przeszkód. Wczoraj była pierwsza dyskusja na temat rynku wewnętrznego. Dzisiaj dyskusja z szefową Banku Centralnego, Europejskiego Banku Centralnego Christine Lagarde. Wskażę na kilka ryzyk, które niestety się zmaterializowały, o których rozmawialiśmy. Ryzyko w sektorze bankowym, tak naprawdę bankructwo banku Credit Suisse i przejęcie jego, to jeden z największych banków w Europie. Wskażę również na ryzyka na rynku funduszy i związane z niektórymi instrumentami finansowymi. Wszystko to po to, aby rynek wewnętrzny rozwijał się po prostu stabilnie. Dla nas rynek wewnętrzny jest ogromną wartością. Rynek wewnętrzny to możliwości eksportowe polskich małych i średnich przedsiębiorców. Właśnie ich los interesuje mnie najbardziej i to właśnie wszystkie regulacje, które tutaj są robione, analizujemy pod tym kątem. W tym celu też spotkam się za parę dni w Polsce z Thierry Bretonem, komisarzem odpowiedzialnym za rynek wewnętrzny i za rynek usług. Podkreślam kwestię rynku usług, ponieważ znaczna część gospodarki przesuwa się w kierunku usług, a rynek usług, różnego rodzaju usług, od budowlanych przez informatyczne, turystyczne, wszelkie inne, nie jest jeszcze tak zintegrowany w Europie jak rynek dóbr, czy chociażby właśnie rynek kapitałowy, o którym dzisiaj będziemy rozmawiali. Dlatego to tak ważne, aby Polska nie tylko poszerzała granice swobód na jednolitym rynku w zakresie usług, ale jednocześnie też inspirowała innych i to robimy tutaj, żeby wdrażać szybko takie regulacje, które zwiększą konkurencyjność całego rynku wewnętrznego. Także i ta debata w inkluzywnym formacie związana ze strefą euro, ale tak naprawdę przecież będzie ona oczywiście na temat stabilności rynku finansowego, stabilności rynku bankowego, bo tutaj mieliśmy do czynienia z ogromnym zawirowaniem. Dziękuję bardzo.